I want to continue my reflection on Fleming Rutledge's wonderful book on the crucifixion, which, as I've said, is one of the best theology books I've read in the last 10 years. So last time I talked about her insistence, really bracing for our time, on the sheer strangeness and awfulness of the cross. So it wasn't just that Jesus died, not just that he was put to death, but that he died in this uniquely horrific way. So the cross was the way that the lowest members of a society would die. It was the most dehumanizing, degrading way that one could die. And that's what was so shocking about early Christianity. When Paul says, I preach one thing, Christ and him crucified, that's what would have taken people aback. We've had 2,000 years of thinking about the cross and looking at representations of it, so we don't get this. But how absolutely strange it was to put a crucified criminal at the heart of the operation. So she's really good at bringing that out. How somehow on that cross, Jesus performed a work, or he paid a price that was adequate to the weight of sin. Now, whenever you talk about that, paying a price or performing a work that was necessary, you move into the thought world of Anselm of Canterbury, one of the greatest of the medieval theologians, and his famous theory of satisfaction, that somehow that cross of Jesus was a sacrifice requisite for the satisfaction of the Father's just demand vis-a-vis human sin. Think of the fact that Jesus is truly human means he can represent a fallen humanity. The fact that he's truly divine means he can pay the full price. Hence Anselm's famous book, Cur Deus Homo in Latin, meaning literally, why the God-man? And the answer is because you need this one who's both divine and human to perform this great sacrifice. Okay, even those casually acquainted with theology know the outlines of that theory. Even in Anselm's own time, and up through the centuries to the present day, especially to the present day, this theory is met with a lot of opposition. I remember vividly, this is many years ago, being at a major theological conference in this country, and a serious speaker got up and said, Anselm's theory is an example of cosmic child abuse. The father, abusing his son in this terrible way. Others say, it makes God seem like a tin pot dictator whose honor has been so offended that he has to have this awful price paid to restore his wounded honor. So a lot of people today, at the popular level, even the high theological level, have deep trouble with Anselm. But one of the best things, I think, in Fleming Rutledge's book is her way of defending Anselm against these finely superficial and trivial misreadings. Now, let me say a couple things about that. Anselm, like all the other great medieval theologians, would have held that God is immutable. God does not change. Therefore, it's always wrong to speak of God moving from one state to another, as though God's in a bad mood, then something happens, and now he's in a good mood. Or, man, was he offended, but then this thing happened, and now he's not offended. That's ipso facto the wrong way ever to talk about the immutable God. And so we can't speak of him like a raging, alcoholic, dysfunctional father moving from one state to another. Rather, what do we find actually in the Gospels? That God so loved the world that he sent his only son. It was not out of vengeance. It was not to satisfy his dysfunctional emotional state that God the Father sent the Son, but rather out of love. Another way to put this is the Father and Son, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, are always operating together. It's not a question of the Son being abused by the Father or the Son being misused. All that is so much nonsense and is deeply unfair to St. Anselm. Okay, so much for some of these more trivial misreadings. So what does it mean? How should we interpret Anselm's theory? Well, go back now to the Cur Deus Homo itself, which is a great text. I urge people to read it. And it's set up as a kind of dialogue, like Plato's dialogues. And his conversation partner is a young monk called Boso, B-O-S-O. And Boso raises this objection. He says, look, why couldn't God simply have forgiven humanity from heaven? Why did he have to go through this awful drama of the crucifixion? It's a fair question, right? I suppose a lot of people today would have that. Like, in fact, after the Mel Gibson movie, after The Passion of the Christ, a lot of people raised that same question. Like, okay, I get it, but why? Why would God have demanded that? Here's Anselm's initial response to his interlocutor. He says, you have not considered the weight of sin. A word of forgiveness declared from heaven, like from a distance, would not begin to deal with sin. See, what's going on in the life and death of Jesus is a working in and with sin so as to change it, to undo it from the inside. God, as it were, had to enter like a warrior into sin so as to break it and conquer it from the inside. A word of forgiveness blithely offered from a distance is not going to affect what has to be affected. What's happening on the cross but God going into God-forsakenness, taking on himself precisely the dysfunction of the world, symbolized by all those forces that brought him to the cross. See? Now, having taken all that on, he's able, through the divine mercy, to break it and remake it from the inside. But see, all of that demands a work. It demands that a price be paid. It's a battle that has to be won. This is not to satisfy the irrational anger of God the Father. It's rather God effecting the work of transfiguring the human race from the inside. Now, go back to Anselm for a second. One of his great images is the diamond. So humanity is like a beautiful diamond, which has fallen into the muck of sin. And because of its weight, it's gone all the way to the bottom. Now, from a distance, God could say, oh, everything's fine. I forgive you. Well, yeah, okay. That and $2 will get you on the bus. Because what God had to do was not just pronounce something, but rather affect something. He had to come down. Now, the Father, out of love, sends the Son, who accepts the mission, by the way, out of love, sends the Son all the way down into the bottom of God-forsakenness, so as to grab that diamond and now bring it up and polish it off. There's the work of the cross. There's the work of the cross. Yes, a price had to be paid, so to speak. Yes, satisfaction had to be made. Not to mollify a dysfunctional heavenly, alcoholic. That's not it. A work had to be done to remake the human race from the inside. So, could I urge everybody to read Fleming Rutledge's wonderful book, especially her treatment of Anselm? But even better, use that as a starting point to go back to Anselm's Cur Deus Homo itself. And then I think you'll be able to see in the cross of Jesus, this terrible, terrible cross, the awful work of the divine love.